Have you ever visited Portugal and wondered what it would be like to actually move there? Well, then today's video is for you. Hi, and welcome back to my channel. If you don't know me, my name is Julia and I'm an American. I've been living in Portugal since 2019. I first came to Portugal in 2017 for an internship. By the end of the 2 months of my internship, when it was time to go home, it felt like I had already made a home. And in December of 2018, I made the decision that I was going to move to Portugal. And in the last 2 years that I have lived here, I have seen a little bit of a different day-to-day. That is not to say that it is a bad experience, but I just want to give you more of a realistic picture of what it would look like if you moved to Portugal. Many people refer to Portugal as an inexpensive place to live. But what does that really mean? Because what's inexpensive and expensive is very subjective. So I think what they refer to is that the cost of living in Portugal can be much lower than it is in other Western European countries, the United States and the United Kingdom. However, the wages in Portugal are also low. So I guess what it really depends on is where your income is coming from. If you move from the United States, for example, like I did, and then you get a job at a Portuguese company, then your wages are also going to be lower. And so you may not feel that the cost of living is that inexpensive. If you have a job where you work remotely in the United States and make a US income and you get to pay for the cost of living in Portugal, then yes, for you it might be inexpensive. So it really just depends on your situation. And then a big factor is housing. Last year, my boyfriend and I looked for apartments to rent in Lisbon, and for a 1-bedroom apartment in decent neighborhoods that weren't too old of buildings, we found places for about 900 euros per month. And then later in the year, we started to look for apartments south of Lisbon, and we were finding 2-bedroom apartments that were much bigger than the apartments in Lisbon for around 500 euros. So almost half what they were in Lisbon, but a lot more space. So as you can see, the farther you go outside of the city, the lower that the rents can be. And if you're not on a major transportation line, it can be even cheaper. But then of course you'll have to worry about the cost of transportation and all that. And we will talk a little bit about transportation later on. And then buying is a whole separate thing, and I haven't endeavored in that, but when I do, I will let you know how that experience goes, because we definitely want to at some point buy a house. There are many things that are also pretty affordable, like food is pretty affordable. However, electricity can be very expensive in Portugal. Many people speak English, not only in Lisbon and Porto, but even I was surprised in some larger towns that weren't that close to Lisbon. You can still find people that speak English, so it seems to be pretty common throughout the country, especially in the younger generation. I would advise you to try to learn Portuguese. It is a tough language, but it's definitely gonna keep you a little bit distanced from the culture. And if you're gonna stay there for a long time, it's definitely worth it because you can form better relationships, and people really appreciate when you take the effort to do that. If you want some helpful apps or resources on how to learn Portuguese, go ahead and check out one of my previous videos. I'll link that in the description below. So another thing that people say about Portugal is that it has a very slow-paced lifestyle. Well, if you want to get something done in a government office, it can take a long time. For example, whenever I was applying for the residence visa, I needed to get a document while I was in Portugal to do with my living arrangements. And we went to the Junta de Freguesia, which is the parish office, to get this paperwork done. And they told us that it would take 3 days to get one form done. For me, that was a very unusual experience. It's just like one form, and it was going to take 3 days. But I think that's just part of the way of life here, that sometimes things take a little bit longer, and it can be a little frustrating if you're used to being able to just get stuff done right away. But it can also be a good thing because it teaches you to plan ahead and to be patient. I definitely feel like people, like when you go to a restaurant or something like that, they're not in a big hurry. They want to stay and relax and enjoy. I can't really recall a time where like a waiter rushed us to get our table free, whereas in the United States, I feel like that's quite common. So there are definitely times where you have to be more patient, which is something I'm learning a lot here in Portugal, and I think is a very good skill to learn. But there are other times where it's not so bad. I feel like here there's a bigger emphasis on having work-life balance and being more in the moment. You're not trying to get something done and going to the next thing and just checking stuff off, and there's so much to do and getting really anxious. And I often felt like that in my lifestyle in the United States, and that probably had something also to do with my job and many factors. But in Portugal, I feel like there's a greater emphasis on being in the moment, and so you can really enjoy like a meal with friends and not rush off to something, and it's just a lot more calm in that way. in Portugal, there is more paperwork and there's more information that they ask from you. So for example, before moving to Portugal, I became a freelancer. I'm a freelance medical editor and proofreader. And whenever I started doing that in the United States, I just started freelancing, and then you just make sure to pay your taxes as you go. But in Portugal, that is not the same case. So once I moved to Portugal, I had to register at the financial office called Finanças as a freelancer and state the job code of the activity that I was going to perform before I could actually start freelancing. That was a confusing process for me when I first came here, but I figured it out. I would definitely say that the extra paperwork part is a downside of living to Portugal. It's definitely not enough to say don't move here, because Portugal is awesome and it has a lot of factors to outweigh that, but it is one thing that you should just get used to, that there's going to be more paperwork, and that paperwork might be kind of slow to get done. Not to mention the fact that if you don't speak Portuguese, it's going to take you a little bit more extra time if you go to an office and they don't speak English very comfortably, and if you have to read forms in Portuguese, it can just take some extra time. So that's something you get used to in general if you move abroad, but it gets better over time. When we're talking about social services, so I think that one really great thing about Portugal is that it offers more services to its citizens, and even if you're not a citizen but you're a resident of Portugal, you can benefit from things like the public health care. And if you come from the United States like I did, you will find this one of the things to truly be less expensive, and that's something really nice. Also, in terms of services, I just want to talk about the experience when you're dealing with different companies. So in the United States, for example, which I use this a lot as an example, but that's where I came from, so I've only lived in the United States and Portugal. In the United States, we have this the customer is always right thing. I know this because I've worked in customer service jobs, and the main goal is always to make sure the customer is satisfied, to get them back and keep the business going. But in Portugal, that's not necessarily the case. That's not to say that a waiter or the staff in a store are not interested in making you happy. It's just, I think they have a more realistic approach that when a customer has a complaint, that it's something that can be discussed, and maybe the customer wasn't understanding something. Also, in restaurants, it really depends. I've had a lot of different experiences. I've had some where the waiters are really attentive, but most of the time they definitely check on you from time to time, but I don't feel rushed, and I feel like maybe sometimes they could come around a bit more, but that's just something that I'm used to. I've learned to enjoy having more time without somebody coming to the table, can I get you anything? But yeah, you do have to flag them down sometimes. So those are some of the experiences for me for what it's really like to live in Portugal. As I said, I've been living here for 2 years, and I have friends that are both Portuguese and are foreigners like me. But if you found something different or you want to add to this, feel free to leave that in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences about living in Portugal, or what are your curiosities, anything that I didn't mention that you have a burning question about what it's like to live in Portugal, please let me know. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon for notifications. That way you'll get notified whenever I post new videos. So thanks for watching, and ciao!